So good morning, viewers. Today we have a 2011 F150. It's got 112,000 kilometers on it, very low mileage for the age. And it's here for a rear differential, rear limited slip chatter. I don't know if they're going to feel it this morning because it's been sitting all day. It usually shows up worse when you drive it on the highway and at highway speeds for a period of time, and then come to a low speed situation where you're turning slightly. You'll get this shudder from the rear end. It's already had the rear differential fluid changed a couple of times and additive friction modifier put in it. In fact, I think there was a bulletin from Ford on this, and it had the clutch plates done maybe 5 years ago when the vehicle was still under warranty. I can actually feel it. Just turning ever so slightly, you can feel this sort of shudder in the drivetrain. So we're going to bring it in and put a set of clutch plates in this thing and take the differential apart. So obviously we need to raise the vehicle on the lift, which I have done, and remove the rear tires. Now the back axles have to come out, so these brake calipers have to come off. The brakes on this thing were recently replaced, so they're in excellent shape. The rotors look good. Hopefully there's no issues with the parking brakes, but we're going to take the brake calipers off and put them up on top of the differential, pull the drum or the rotors off, and then the rear diff cover. If you're wondering how to take off these little vibration dampeners here, I just grabbed them with a pair of vice grips. I believe there's an access hole in here, but I've never used it. I just grabbed the aluminum with a pair of vice grips. They usually come off pretty easy. And then once they're off, you can go on here with a semi-deep 10 mil socket to get the actual caliper bolt out. Man, how long is this thing? I don't know how important these things are, but it changes the resonance or the mass. So once you got the calipers and rotors off, you can tie the calipers up and leave that bolt in because it doesn't come out with the spring in the way. Put a drain pan underneath it and pull the diff cover bolts off. 3 of the bolts have studs on them for a wire harness, speed sensor harness, so make sure you put them back in the same locations. I go 1, 2, 3. I think you'll figure it out when you see the harness. It has to pin on those things. So we'll get this cover off and have a look inside. Wow, you can tell this oil's been changed. It's like brand new. So we're going to go inside here and see if we can change these differential plates without having to pull the carrier out. I'm not sure if that's doable or not because there's wave washers in there that put pressure on this axle side gears. But we'll find out shortly. So we have to remove this differential pinion pin lock bolt, and it's usually recommended to replace this bolt. If you do reuse it, make sure you clean the threads and remove any oil with some brake cleans and Loctite it, because this is a fairly important bolt. Trust me, if this little bolt falls out, some significant issues occur when this pin comes out of the differential at 60 miles an hour. On rare occasions, this pin will break off. You can see it's got some wear on it. So I do have a new one. We're going to be replacing it. So we should be able to reach in behind here and push this bolt through, or this bolt through. I might have to turn the diff. Let's go this way, so that I can tap that pin in. I should be using a punch, but I don't have one handy and it's not that tight. wanted to get it out. Now I gotta go back the other way now, which is harder. Okay, so we got that differential pin coming around here. I'm going to get a wrench so I can turn this. So once you get the diff in a place where you can pull this pin out, if you were just pulling the axles out, you would slide the pin out about this far and push the axle in until the diff C-lock falls out of there. Now you might have to turn it, and you may have to use a magnet to fish it out. There it is there. And then pull the axle out. Pull that axle on that side. Okay, go push the other side in. Go push the other side in. I have a helper today. Okay, that's good. Now if I was just doing axle seals, this is what's required, and I wouldn't want to turn the differential pinion pin, so if I keep this in place, it'll keep the axle side gears from falling out. Why doesn't it want to come out of there? And I don't know why this is not coming out. There we go. So there's the C-lock. Okay, pull that axle out. I guess I might as well take this out because we are changing. Pull it out. All right. Now if we turn one spider gear, this whole assembly will turn and the clutches will fall out. So I'm going to pull the carrier out because these differential clutch plates are under pressure. They're spring loaded. So I won't be able to get them back in, especially a new set, because they're going to be less worn. So I'm going to pull these carrier caps off. But before we do that, we're going to mark them so that they go back on in the same orientation. I don't see any marks on them, which is kind of odd. Normally this would be marked from disassembly. Well, I'm certainly going to mark them. So put a center punch mark on the cap and the case, and you'll notice I put 2 on this side, and the marks go out so the cap, I know which way it goes, and I'm pretty sure these are 21 mil or 13/16, so we'll take these off, and there'll be shims in here. We can't disturb it. We're going to take them out, but we have to keep them on the appropriate side. So now we just pry the housing out, and remember I said there's a shim here and a shim here, so we don't want to mix them up. And this is fairly heavy, so I'm using a hook bar onto one of the caps, and I'm just going to pry it out. And be prepared to catch the bearing caps and the shims. So this is one shim on this side, so we're going to put that off over here and set it up on top of the diff, and then take the carrier. Alright, this shim, usually I hang it on the shock, put it over here, and put this one on the brake caliper bracket so that I don't mix them up. This thing is pristine inside, there's no metal, which is great. No signs of metal filings. Okay, so we're going to get set up to take this carrier apart now. So I mount one of the axle shafts in a heavy duty vise so that I can stop this axle side gear from turning and clamp it good and tight, and then we can put a wrench on here and turn this, and it'll roll the axle side gears. You can see it's already starting to roll. It'll roll them out, and then the clutch plates and assembly will fall apart. I'll show you that in a second. Okay, I'm going to try and turn this with a wrench. So I'm putting a 13/16 wrench on the carrier bolt and just rotate it until you hear the springs, until it falls off. So that gets the axle side gears, or the spider gears, and the spider gear washers. There's the other one from this side. Oh, it's on there. And then the top axle side gear. And this is what's in there, is a spring-loaded plate. This wave washer is a spring-loaded plate. So we keep these all in order. And the bottom set of gears is in there as well. So the next challenge is going to be getting it back together. I have to compress these washers, and I think I have a homemade tool that I use for this. Obviously the dealership has a special service tool for compressing these. If you had taken this apart in the vehicle, you'd never get it back together again. So this is the left side, this is the right side, and you can see that there's a spring-loaded washer that creates the pressure on the plates, and this is referred to as a limited slip. So these are the plates that we're changing, these friction discs. So there's a steel plate, a friction disc, a steel plate, a friction disc, and so on. So we have a whole new kit from the dealer, and we're going to clean up everything and transfer them in there. So this is a clutch kit that I purchased from Ford. It's supposed to have all the clutch plates in it, and then I think there are 2 extra parts that you need. Yeah, these 2 washers you need. These are separate. Apparently, that's the way they sold them to me anyways. I see there's only one in here. Yeah, this is one of the spring-loaded washers. And we're gonna clean up all these parts and put the new pieces on there. Then we got to figure out how to get it back together again. There's the friction modifier. We're going to use it to actually put some on as a pre-lubricant on the plates, and some 75 140 synthetic gear oil as well. So here's what I'm doing. I'm putting a steel washer, and because it doesn't rotate, I'm putting some of this lube on the washer. And a fiber plate. And repeat that for the whole stack. And put the remainder of this oil in the differential when you're refilling it. The challenge is going to be compressing these wave washers to get this to turn back in, and the more pressure you put on it, the less likely it is to rotate, because the pressure is what keeps the clutch plates from, or drives the wheels in the first place, is that pressure. And there should be one more. And then this steel washer. The one without the splines goes on the very inside, or top side in this case. And really don't need any lubricant on here because it doesn't turn. but we'll put some. And then we have a new spring-loaded washer. And that goes in this orientation. That's a wave washer. So we're ready to reassemble. This goes into the left side of the case, facing down. You have to drop it in there and then set the case back up on the stand here. Okay, so the dealer has a special tool that clamps in the vise that goes into one of the axle side gear, and then they have a spreading device that spreads the two axle side gears apart, compressing the washers. What I used was a piece of ready rod and a couple of large diameter stabilizer link washers to spread it apart, and then you have to clamp the axle shaft in the vise as tight as you possibly can, because the axle shaft is going to turn. It's going to take about 200 foot-pounds to rotate the axle housing and rotate the gears into place. I'll try and see if we can see that working. So I'm using a 5/8 socket and a 1/2-inch extension and a piece of pipe on here to turn this. I've got the gears started. You got to make sure that the gears are across from each other, and then you rotate it slowly, and it rotates the axle side gears into place, the spider gears into place. And the more you press up washers, the tighter these clutches are going to be. And hopefully we've got the two axle side gears rotated so that they're going to line up. Let's see here. It's looking close. Yeah, it's looking close. It's just got to go another 1/4 of an inch. Oh, now the axle shaft turned. Well, I'm going to tighten the vise up some more. Well, you get the idea. I just got to go another 1/8 of an inch. As you can see, it's just about lined up. And it looks like it's the same on both sides, so it managed to get it across from each other. That's how you got to compress it. Compress the washers and then take the spacer out. Well, it took 2 tries because it was out one tooth on one gear, so you got to get both of them lined up, as you can see on the bottom here, and then so the shaft goes through. What I'm going to do is put the shaft in partially and remove my washers. So there, it's re-together or reassembled, and new clutch plates are in. Yeah, that worked pretty good with the spacer in between there like that, and just spreading the two gears apart and using the axle shaft in the vise like this. The biggest challenge was trying to keep the axle from turning. I had it upright, but I wasn't grabbing enough of the axle, so I turned it sideways. Plus it was easier to pull on and push on. Using a socket, they have a tool that fits into the pinion pin hole, but I used a 5/8 1/2-inch drive socket that was exactly the right dimension, and a 1/2-inch extension and a cheater pipe on the end of it. So we're ready to reassemble this differential. I'm going to change the axle seal because we have them we're at that point right now. We're going to do that proactively. So there's the carrier reinstalled. What I do is I put it in on this side with the appropriate shim and bearing, and I leave it out about 1/4 of an inch. I start this shim, I put this cap on, start this shim, and I tap the shim in. You got to be careful because these are cast shims. I tap them in with this homemade spacer or piece of mild steel, and I gradually pull the caps in with the bolts by hand. Now these bolts are torqued to 88 foot-pounds, but always double check your differential in case it's a different size. I think this is an 8.8, there's a 9.75 as well. And this bolt is 22 foot-pounds, and they recommend to replace it. I've got a new bolt just temporarily installed in there. So we're going to torque these caps down to 88 and then install the axle seals and put the axle shafts back in. So those both axle seals removed. The bearings look good. There's no pitting in the bearings or the axle shaft. So we're ready to put the seals in. So I did buy new seals right from Ford. That's the part number if you're interested. Now, what I would recommend, because I don't have the actual factory seal driver, is to pack this area behind the garter spring here, that little spring that's in there, with chassis grease or wheel bearing grease, just so that spring doesn't pop off when you hit the seal. So here you can see I've actually packed it full of grease. I've also put a little tiny bit of Teflon pipe thread sealant around the outside of the seal circumference just to seal it in the housing, although it's already factory coated. So we're ready to tap that in. Okay, so we're going to install this side. Oh, sorry. Just making sure that it's going in square. And that's it. Now we're ready to wipe off the axle shafts and reinstall the axle shafts. So now we got the axle shaft slid in. We need to put in the C-locks, and that requires taking this little pinion bolt out, sliding the shaft out. Now that might be a little challenge. Might have to get a... yeah, I'm gonna have to grab it with something. Okay, so we're going to push the axle in now. Can you push that in from the other side? Push it in. You might need to tap on it. Okay, do the right side. Okay, that's far enough. Now pull it out. Okay, so we just got to get the left side pushed in. So there's the differential back together, the C-locks in place, through pin, nuke bolt in there, 22 foot-pounds. I'm going to pour the rest of the additive in here, or it doesn't really matter, I can put it in anytime. I'm going to reseal the cover, put the rotors and brake calipers back on, and fill the differential up with fluid. That should be it. So there's the rear differential back together again. Rotors and calipers reinstalled. Diff cover reinstalled, resealed, painted. Filled it with 75-140 Valvoline synthetic oil, and I put the rest of that additive in from Ford as well. You need about 3.5 quarts of that fluid, and we're ready to put the tires back on, and we should be good to go. Thanks for watching.